Careful, Ethan Cole said, tapping the red glove lightly against Naomi Carter's shoulder. We don't hit girls hard here. The gym exploded with laughter. Not loud at first, just scattered chuckles bouncing off the heavy bags and mirrored walls before growing into something sharper, meaner, the kind of laughter people used when they already believed they knew how the story would end. Naomi stood still near the edge of the mat, her old gray hoodie hanging loose around her frame, hands wrapped in faded black tape instead of proper gloves. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed softly, washing the entire boxing gym in a cold white glow that made everyone look harder than they really were. Somewhere behind her, someone whispered, "This is going to be embarrassing." Another phone lifted into the air. Then another. The tiny camera lenses reflected the overhead lights like little blinking eyes waiting for a knockout clip to upload later. Ethan grinned wider when he noticed. Of course he noticed. Ethan always noticed when people were watching. He bounced lightly on his feet in the center of the ring, black belt tied perfectly around his waist, even though tonight's sparring session was supposed to be casual. The logo of the gym stretched across the back of his compression shirt, dark with sweat near the collar. Every movement looked practiced, controlled. Camera ready. You sure about this? Tyler Reed called from beside the water cooler, folding his arms. Might want to start with jump rope first. More laughter. Naomi lowered her eyes for half a second, not out of fear, but calculation. She could smell disinfectant mixed with old sweat and rubber mats. Hear the squeak of sneakers against canvas. Feel the dull ache under the bandage wrapped tightly around her ribs beneath the hoodie. The injury pulled every time she breathed too deep, but she ignored it the same way she ignored the stairs. Coach Brooks stood near the far wall, clipboard tucked under one arm, saying nothing. His weathered face stayed unreadable beneath the shadow of his gray cap. He had asked for a volunteer after Ethan complained the regular sparring partners were too easy. Naomi had raised her hand before. She could think herself out of it. That alone had shocked the room. The cleaning girl volunteering to spar the gym's favorite black belt. A joke before the bell had even rung. Ethan leaned against the ropes now, shaking his head slowly like he almost felt sorry for her. Listen, he said, voice softer this time. Louder somehow, because the room had gone quieter to hear him. Nobody's trying to hurt your feelings. This just isn't really your lane. Naomi finally looked up at him. Calm eyes. Steady breathing. No anger. That unsettled him more than if she had yelled back. Tyler smirked. She probably watched one self-defense video on YouTube. Someone snorted near the lockers. Naomi reached up slowly and pulled the hoodie over her head. The laughter faded just a little. She wasn't physically intimidating. That surprised some people. Lean build. Narrow shoulders. No flashy muscles. Just quiet balance. But Coach Brooks straightened slightly the second he saw how she planted her feet. Left foot angled. Chin relaxed. Hands loose, not stiff. Not beginner posture. Not even close. Ethan rolled his neck casually, still smiling for the phones pointed his way. Don't worry, he said, climbing fully through the ropes now. I'll go easy. Naomi stepped toward the ring without answering. The overhead lights reflected faintly across the white athletic tape around her knuckles. One of the boys near the mirrors lowered his phone slightly. Another stopped laughing altogether. The room was changing. Slowly, quietly, like people were beginning to sense something they couldn't explain yet. Coach Brooks finally spoke, his voice low and rough like gravel sliding across concrete. Touch gloves, he said. Ethan extended his glove lazily, barely taking it seriously. Naomi touched it once. Light. Respectful. Then she stepped back into stance. And for the first time that night, Ethan's smile faded just a little. The bell rang once, sharp and metallic, cutting through the gym like a snapped wire. Ethan moved first, fast enough to impress the room, fast enough to make the phones rise higher again. He circled lightly across the mat, shoulders relaxed, confidence pouring off him as naturally as sweat. Naomi stayed still for half a second longer, studying him. Her breathing remained even. Slow in, slow out. The ache beneath her ribs tightened again under the compression wrap hidden beneath her shirt, but she kept her posture loose. Ethan flicked out the first jab with playful confidence, not trying to land hard, only trying to embarrass her. Naomi leaned back just enough for the glove to pass in front of her face. A few people chuckled. Ethan smirked. You are nervous, he said under his breath. Naomi did not answer. The fluorescent lights reflected off the mirrors lining the far wall as Ethan stepped in again, this time adding movement to his shoulders, trying to bait her into reacting wrong. He expected panic. Most beginners panicked when someone pressured them early. But Naomi's feet shifted smoothly across the canvas, quiet and balanced, like she had measured the distance before the bell even rang. Ethan threw another quick combination, clean and technical. Naomi slipped around it without wasting movement. The gym grew quieter. Tyler lowered his phone slightly. Coach Brooks folded his arms tighter across his chest, eyes narrowing beneath the brim of his cap. Ethan noticed it too. The change in the room. The disappearing laughter. His grin faded another inch. He stepped closer now, forcing the pace, bouncing lightly as the soles of his shoes squeaked against the mat. "Come on," he muttered. "Hit me." Naomi finally raised her eyes fully to his. Calm, focused, not intimidated. That unsettled him more than getting hit would have. He lunged forward again, faster this time, trying to cut off the ring and trap her near the ropes. Naomi pivoted cleanly to the side before he could corner her. A soft murmur spread through the gym. One of the younger students blinked hard. "Yo," he whispered to his friend. "Did you see that?" Ethan heard it. His jaw tightened. He threw another sequence, sharper now, less playful than before. Naomi blocked one strike lightly against her forearm and rolled underneath the next with smooth timing that looked practiced, drilled, old. Not lucky. Never lucky. Sweat glistened faintly along Ethan's forehead now. The phones were still. Recording, but nobody laughed anymore. Naomi could feel every eye in the room tracking her movement. Feel the tension shifting. People no longer waiting for her to fail. Now they were trying to figure her out. Ethan suddenly stepped in aggressively, trying to force control back into the moment. Naomi retreated one step and felt pain pull sharply through her side. Small, hidden, but real. Her breath caught for the briefest instant. Coach Brooks noticed immediately. His eyes flicked toward her ribs beneath the loose fabric of her shirt. Ethan saw only the hesitation. He mistook it for weakness. "There it is," he said, confidence returning to his voice. "Knew you would crack." Tyler laughed nervously from the sidelines, but it sounded forced now. Naomi rolled her shoulders once and reset her stance. Across the room, the heavy bag chain swayed slightly from the air conditioning vents overhead, clinking softly in the silence between movements. Then Ethan rushed forward again, determined to finally make her look small in front of everyone watching. But the second he stepped inside too carelessly, Naomi pivoted left with perfect balance and tapped her glove lightly against the side of his shoulder before sliding away untouched. The room froze. Ethan stopped moving. Not because the strike hurt. It did not. But because of what it meant. A clean opening. A mistake he should never have allowed. One of the phones near the mirror slowly lowered out of frame. Coach Brooks exhaled quietly through his nose. "That," he murmured under his breath, almost to himself, "is not beginner movement." Ethan's expression changed so slightly most people would have missed it. But Naomi saw it immediately. The tiny shift in his jaw. The quick tightening around his eyes. Pride cracking under pressure. The gym stayed unusually quiet after her glove brushed his shoulder. No cheers. No laughter. Just the distant hum of the ceiling fans and the soft creak of leather as people adjusted their stance near the walls. Tyler cleared his throat awkwardly and forced out a laugh that died halfway through. "Lucky touch," he muttered, though even he did not sound convinced anymore. Ethan rolled his shoulders once and bounced lightly again, but the rhythm was different now. Less relaxed. Less theatrical. He was no longer performing for the phones. He was trying to solve a problem. Naomi remained calm across from him, breathing carefully through the ache beneath her ribs. The pain was spreading slowly now, dull and warm under the wrap around her side, but she kept her hands steady. Across the room, Coach Brooks had not looked away from her feet once. "Southpaw adjustment," he murmured quietly. "Efficient pivots. Minimal waste." One of the younger students glanced at him. "What?" Coach Brooks did not answer. Ethan stepped forward again, slower this time, studying her movement. "Who trained you?" he asked quietly enough that only she could hear. Naomi circled left without answering. Ethan threw another controlled combination, sharper now, technically clean. Naomi blocked the first strike, slipped under the second, then pivoted out before he could trap her near the ropes. Again, too smooth, too natural. Ethan's breathing grew louder. Not exhausted. Frustrated. The sound of sneakers sliding against canvas echoed through the room as he pressed forward harder, trying to increase the tempo. Naomi gave ground carefully, measuring every inch of space. Then Ethan suddenly fainted high and stepped inside fast. Naomi reacted instantly, rotating her shoulders and redirecting his momentum just enough to break his balance for half a second. It was small, almost invisible, but several people near the mirrors gasped softly. Ethan reset quickly, pretending it had not happened. His ears had turned slightly red beneath the harsh gym lighting. Naomi noticed that too. "You can stop now if you want," Ethan said, trying to recover the old confidence in his voice. "Nobody will judge you." Naomi looked at him for a long moment. Sweat glistened lightly along her forehead now, but her eyes stayed calm. "You already did," she said quietly. The words landed harder than anyone expected. Silence spread across the gym again. Tyler looked down at his phone screen instead of the ring. One of the girls near the lockers slowly crossed her arms, expression changing from amusement to discomfort. Ethan exhaled sharply through his nose and rushed forward again, this time abandoning some of the flashy movement he usually used during sparring. His strikes became straighter, simpler, more serious. Naomi's body reacted before thought. Slip, pivot, step, guard. Every motion economical. Every breath controlled. Coach Brooks stared harder with each exchange. Memories were pulling across his face now, old recognition surfacing slowly beneath disbelief. Then Naomi shifted her weight for a split second, and pain flashed through her ribs again. Her right side tightened visibly this time. Ethan caught it immediately. So did Coach Brooks. "Hold up," the coach called instinctively from ringside. But Ethan moved first, stepping inside before Naomi fully reset her stance. The pressure in the room jumped instantly. Phones rose again. Someone whispered, "Now he has her." Ethan closed distance aggressively, trying to finally overwhelm her pace. Naomi backed toward the ropes, breathing shallow now, the overhead lights reflecting sharply in her eyes. Then suddenly, through the noise of sneakers and heavy breathing and restless shifting around the ring, another sound cut through her memory. A garage door rattling open during winter. Jump rope tapping concrete. Her father's voice low and steady. "Let them underestimate you," he used to say while snow pressed against the tiny garage windows back in Akron. "Confidence gets loud right before it breaks." Naomi blinked once and returned fully to the present. Ethan stepped in again, convinced he finally saw weakness. But Coach Brooks had stopped watching Ethan completely. Because for the first time that night, he realized Naomi was not surviving this sparring session anymore. She was studying it. The air inside the gym felt heavier now, thick with sweat, silence, and the growing discomfort of people realizing they may have judged someone too quickly. Ethan circled carefully across the mat, but the confidence he walked in with was beginning to fracture around the edges. Naomi could see it every time he reset his stance too fast. Every time his shoulders tightened after missing another clean opening. The phones were still raised around the ring, but nobody was recording for laughs anymore. They were recording because something strange was happening, and nobody wanted to miss the moment it finally made sense. Naomi shifted lightly near the ropes, breathing shallow through the ache in her side. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed softly, reflecting against the thin layer of sweat forming along her neck. Ethan stepped forward again, slower this time, trying to regain control of the pace. "You train somewhere," he said quietly. "Where?" Naomi kept moving. Left foot. Pivot. Guard high. No answer. That irritated him more than trash talk ever could. Ethan had spent years inside gyms where people reacted to his presence immediately. Some admired him. Some feared him. Most tried too hard to impress him. But Naomi did none of those things. She moved like his reputation meant nothing. That feeling crawled under his skin worse than embarrassment. Tyler leaned toward one of the younger students near the mirrors. "She got lucky a couple times," he whispered, though his voice lacked conviction now. The younger student did not respond. His eyes stayed locked on Naomi's footwork. Coach Brooks slowly stepped closer to the ring apron, arms crossed tightly. His weathered expression had shifted completely from curiosity to concern. Not for Ethan. For Naomi. He noticed the subtle hesitation every few breaths. The tiny tightening near her ribs whenever she rotated too sharply. She was hiding pain. Real pain. Yet somehow her technique stayed precise. Disciplined. Controlled. Ethan suddenly pressed forward harder, forcing Naomi backward toward the ropes again. This time the room reacted immediately, bodies leaning forward around the edges of the mat. A few students exchanged glances, sensing momentum changing again. Ethan stepped inside aggressively, trying to trap her before she could pivot away. Naomi slipped the first approach cleanly, but the movement pulled sharply through her injured side. Her breath caught. Tiny. Barely visible. But Ethan saw it. His eyes narrowed instantly. There you are, he muttered. Confidence flickered back across his face. Naomi reset her stance slowly, keeping her breathing. Controlled despite the pain spreading under the wrap around her ribs. Sweat rolled down her spine beneath the loose black shirt. The gym smelled like old leather and floor cleaner. Somewhere in the back, a speed bag kept swaying slightly from leftover motion, tapping rhythmically against its platform like a heartbeat. Ethan stepped in again, faster now, sensing weakness. Naomi's back foot touched the edge of the ropes for the first time that night. The room tightened. Tyler smirked again, relieved. Knew it, he said under his breath. But Coach Brooks did not look relieved at all. His eyes narrowed harder as Naomi shifted her weight sideways instead of panicking against the ropes. Calm. Too calm. Ethan threw another fast sequence, trying to overwhelm her with pressure and movement. Naomi blocked the first motion lightly, slipped underneath the second, then rotated sharply to her left. Clean. Efficient. The move happened so naturally several people missed it entirely. 1 second Ethan thought he had her cornered. The next second, he was turning around trying to find her again. The room gasped softly. Naomi now stood 2 feet away from him near center ring, balanced and composed, breathing carefully through the pain in her side. Ethan stared at her. Really stared for the first time all night. Not as the cleaning girl. Not as the joke everyone expected to fail. As a fighter. The realization unsettled him immediately. He rushed forward again before the thought could settle fully into his mind. But Naomi's eyes sharpened now too. Something colder had entered her focus. Not anger. Recognition. She had seen this before. Men getting louder when confidence started slipping. Men mistaking pressure for control. Her father used to warn her about it during late nights training in the garage while freezing rain tapped against the metal door. People tell on themselves when they are frustrated, he used to say while tightening old hand wraps around her wrists. Listen carefully when pride starts breathing hard. Ethan stepped inside again, faster and more reckless than before. And for the first time that night, Naomi stopped moving backward. The shift happened so quietly that most people did not understand it at first. 1 second Ethan was pressing forward with growing confidence, convinced he had finally pushed Naomi into survival mode. The next second she planted her feet near center ring and stopped giving ground entirely. The room noticed before Ethan did. The energy changed. The nervous shuffling around the mat disappeared. Even the phones seemed steadier now, their cameras fixed on Naomi instead of waiting for Ethan to entertain them. Sweat rolled slowly down Ethan's temple as he circled in front of her, breathing heavier than before. His black belt hung slightly crooked now from the constant movement. For the first time all night, he looked less like the polished star of the gym and more like someone struggling to keep control of a situation that no longer made sense to him. Naomi stood relaxed, shoulders loose, hands calm at chin level. But inside, her ribs burned harder with every breath. The wrap beneath her shirt felt too tight now, pressing painfully against the bruise spreading underneath. She ignored it the same way she ignored Tyler whispering near the mirrors. She is slowing down, Tyler muttered quietly. Ethan is about to finish this. But Coach Brooks did not take his eyes off Naomi. No, he said under his breath. She is timing him. Ethan stepped in again, sharper now, trying to reclaim momentum before the room fully turned against him. Naomi reacted instantly. Small movements. Efficient movements. She slipped sideways just enough to make him miss cleanly, then pivoted around him before he could trap her near the ropes again. The motion looked effortless, but pain flashed through her side immediately afterward. Her breath shortened. Ethan saw the reaction and mistook it for panic again. Confidence surged back into his face. You should stop, he said loudly enough for the room to hear. Seriously. Naomi looked at him steadily. Why? She asked quietly. Ethan blinked once. Because you are hurt. Naomi's eyes did not leave his. You only noticed after I stopped losing. Silence spread across the gym again. Tyler lowered his phone completely this time. A girl near the lockers slowly folded her arms tighter. Across her chest, expression uneasy now. Ethan opened his mouth to answer, but nothing came out immediately. Because somewhere deep down, he knew she was right. Nobody cared when they thought she was weak. Nobody noticed her pain while they were laughing. Coach Brooks exhaled slowly through his nose, hearing the truth land across the room harder than any strike could have. Ethan's frustration finally cracked through the surface. He stepped forward aggressively again, trying to drown the moment in movement. Naomi stayed composed, watching his shoulders instead of his hands, watching the rhythm break down, watching emotion replace discipline. Her father used to call it fighting angry. Angry fighters always get loud, he would say while old space heaters rattled inside the garage during Ohio winters. Calm fighters hear the openings. Ethan rushed inside again, trying to overwhelm her pace before she could reset. Naomi shifted left smoothly despite the pain in her ribs, then lightly redirected his forward pressure with precise timing. Ethan stumbled one step off balance before catching himself. Gasps spread instantly around the ring. The phones tilted upward again, not because anyone expected Naomi to fail anymore, because people were starting to realize Ethan might. His breathing sounded louder now beneath the buzzing fluorescent lights. Naomi could see uncertainty entering his eyes for the first time. Real uncertainty, the kind that shakes confidence from the inside out. Coach Brooks stepped closer to the ropes, voice low and serious now. "Ethan," he warned. "Slow down." But Ethan barely heard him. Pride had already taken over. He rushed forward one more time, trying to force dominance back into the room before it disappeared completely. Naomi watched him carefully. Calm breathing, relaxed shoulders, focused eyes. Then suddenly she saw it. The opening. Tiny, fast, but there. And for the first time all night, Naomi stepped toward him instead of away. Naomi moved before Ethan fully realized he had overcommit. One sharp step forward. One clean pivot. The motion was so precise it barely looked fast at all, yet suddenly Ethan's balance shifted awkwardly beneath him. Naomi's glove tapped firmly against his chest protector as she redirected his momentum past her shoulder. Nothing dramatic, nothing violent, but the timing was undeniable. Ethan stumbled 2 steps sideways before catching himself against the ropes. The gym froze. Completely. Even the ceiling fan seemed louder now. Tyler stared at the ring with his mouth slightly open, phone hanging uselessly near his waist. A couple students exchanged stunned looks without saying a word. Coach Brooks slowly lowered the clipboard tucked beneath his arm. Ethan straightened immediately, cheeks flushed deep red beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. "Reset," Coach Brooks called calmly, though his eyes never left Naomi. Ethan nodded once, jaw tight, but the confidence that had filled the room earlier was gone now. It had leaked out little by little with every missed opening, every clean pivot, every calm answer Naomi refused to decorate with anger. Sweat darkened the collar of Ethan's shirt as he rolled his shoulders again. His breathing sounded rougher now inside the quiet gym. Naomi stayed composed near center ring, though pain kept pulsing beneath the wrap around her ribs. Every deep inhale felt sharper than the last. She hid it carefully behind steady posture and controlled movement. Ethan circled again, slower now, trying to think instead of react. But frustration kept interrupting his focus. He hated not understanding what was happening, hated the way the room had changed sides without saying it out loud. Earlier they had laughed with him. Now they watched her. Naomi noticed it too. The silence no longer felt cruel. It felt uncertain, curious, respectful in a cautious kind of way. One of the younger students near the mirrors finally whispered, "Who is she?" Coach Brooks answered without taking his eyes off the ring. "Someone who trained the hard way." Ethan heard that. His expression hardened instantly. Pride twisted across his face again. He stepped forward aggressively, trying to reclaim authority before the moment slipped any further away from him. Naomi stayed calm, watching his shoulders tighten before he moved, watching the rhythm disappear from his stance. He was no longer sparring cleanly. He was chasing control. "You could have said something," Ethan muttered as they circled each other again. "About your experience." Naomi's eyes stayed steady on him. "Would you have listened?" Ethan opened his mouth, then stopped. Because deep down, he knew the answer immediately. No, he would have laughed anyway. The truth settled heavily between them. Around the ring, nobody spoke. The old heavy bag chains creaked softly near the back wall, while cold air drifted from the vents overhead. Ethan suddenly rushed in again, determined to force the pace before the silence swallowed him completely. Naomi reacted instantly despite the pain flaring sharply through her side. Slip, step, pivot, calm. The movement looked almost effortless now, like music she had practiced too many years to forget. Ethan missed cleanly again. A soft gasp spread through the room. Naomi lightly tapped his shoulder as she moved past him. Another clean opening. Another reminder. Ethan spun around immediately, frustration flashing openly across his face now. Stop doing that, he snapped. Naomi blinked once. Doing what? Making me look stupid. The words escaped before he could stop them. Silence crashed down harder than before. Tyler looked away immediately. One of the girls near the lockers slowly folded her arms tighter across her chest. Coach Brooks exhaled quietly through his nose. Because everyone in the room understood something Ethan still had not fully admitted to himself yet. Naomi had never tried to embarrass him. She had only defended herself. Ethan lowered his eyes for half a second, shame flickering across his face before pride covered it again. But Naomi saw it. And somehow, that look hurt more than the laughter from earlier. Because beneath all the arrogance and attention and ego, Ethan suddenly looked young. Smaller somehow, like someone realizing too late that he had mistaken confidence for superiority. Naomi adjusted her breathing carefully against the ache in her ribs while the gym remained silent around them. Then Coach Brooks stepped closer to the ropes, voice low and steady. Final round, he said. Keep it clean. Ethan nodded once. Naomi nodded, too. But this time, when they raised their gloves again, the room no longer looked at Naomi like she did not belong there. The bell for the final round echoed through the gym with a hollow metallic ring that seemed to settle directly into everyone's chest. Nobody moved afterward. Nobody joked. The room had become too aware of itself now. Too aware of the way they had looked at Naomi when she first stepped into the ring wearing old shoes and faded hand wraps. Ethan lifted his gloves slowly, breathing harder than he wanted anyone to notice. Sweat clung to his jawline beneath the fluorescent lights, and his black belt no longer looked symbolic tonight. It looked heavy. Naomi stood across from him, shoulders relaxed despite the pain tightening beneath the wrap around her ribs. Every inhale felt sharper now, like pressure building under bruised skin, but her face remained unreadable. Calm. Controlled. The same calm that had slowly unraveled the entire room. Coach Brooks rested both hands on the ring ropes, watching silently. He had seen talented fighters before. Seen aggressive fighters. Flashy fighters. But calm under pressure was rare. Especially in someone so young. Especially in someone being underestimated from the second she walked through the door. Ethan circled carefully, trying to steady his breathing. His pride was fighting two battles now. One inside the ring. One inside himself. He hated that people were looking at Naomi differently now. Hated that Coach Brooks had stopped correcting her and started studying her instead. But more than anything, he hated realizing she had earned it. The gym stayed painfully quiet except for sneakers brushing against canvas and the distant rattle of an air vent overhead. Ethan stepped forward first again, but the energy behind his movement had changed. Less arrogance. More urgency. Naomi noticed immediately. Frustrated fighters always rushed the space between thinking and reacting. Her father used to warn her about that during long nights in the garage when freezing rain tapped against the metal roof and old radios hummed softly beside hanging gloves. People lose balance in their emotions before they lose it in their feet, he would say while tightening tape around her hands. Ethan stepped in sharply, trying to cut off her angle before she could pivot away again. Naomi moved lightly to her left, forcing him to reset. The room followed every motion now like a held breath. One student near the mirrors slowly whispered, "She is controlling the pace." Tyler did not answer this time, because he saw it too. Ethan pressed forward again, faster now, trying to overwhelm the rhythm before it slipped away from him completely. Naomi blocked one motion cleanly, slipped sideways beneath the next, then stepped inside the opening he left exposed for half a second too long. Her glove tapped firmly against his shoulder and chest in quick succession before she pivoted away again. Clean. Precise. Controlled. Ethan froze for a split second. The room gasped openly this time. Not because the contact was dramatic. Because it was undeniable. Naomi had seen the opening before Ethan even realized he created it. Ethan backed up one step, breathing rougher now. His eyes flicked briefly toward the people around the ring. He saw it immediately. Nobody was smiling anymore. Nobody looked entertained. They looked impressed. By her. The realization hit him harder than exhaustion. Naomi adjusted her breathing carefully against the ache in her side. Pain pulsed sharply beneath the wrap around her ribs now, warm and constant, but she refused to show it. Ethan stared at her for a long moment, confusion and frustration fighting across his face. "Why are you working here?" he finally asked quietly. Naomi blinked once. "Because bills do not care what you used to be." The answer settled heavily across the room. Coach Brooks lowered his eyes briefly, understanding far more than the others did. Ethan swallowed hard. He looked at Naomi differently now. Not like a joke. Not like someone trying to prove a point. Like someone carrying weight he had never bothered to notice. Then Ethan stepped forward again, slower this time. More careful. The arrogance was fading out of his movement little by little. But Naomi could still see pride hanging onto him stubbornly, refusing to let go completely. The gym remained silent as they circled beneath the cold white lights. Then suddenly Ethan lunged forward again, determined to finally regain control before the final seconds disappeared. Naomi planted her feet calmly despite the pain burning through her ribs. Her eyes sharpened. Her breathing steadied. And this time, when Ethan rushed in, Naomi did not just react to him. She read him completely. The moment Ethan rushed forward again, Naomi already knew what he was going to do. Not because he lacked skill. He had skill. Real skill. But frustration had narrowed his choices. Pride had made his movements louder, easier to predict. Coach Brooks saw it too from the edge of the ring. Ethan's shoulders tightened before every advance now. His breathing arrived half a second ahead of his feet. Naomi stayed calm beneath the cold fluorescent lights, her ribs aching with every inhale as the gym watched in complete silence. Ethan stepped in aggressively, trying to close distance before she could pivot away again. Naomi slipped to the outside smoothly, her shoes barely whispering against the canvas. Ethan turned sharply to follow her, but she was already repositioned beside him instead of in front of him. The movement looked almost unreal to the people watching because there was no panic in it. No wasted motion. Just timing. Clean timing. A soft murmur spread through the room. Tyler stared openly now, no longer pretending she was lucky. One of the younger students near the lockers shook his head slowly. "How is she doing that?" Coach Brooks answered quietly without looking away from the ring. "She is staying calm while he is fighting emotional." Ethan heard that too. The words struck harder than he wanted to admit. He reset his stance again, but this time his confidence looked fragile around the edges. Naomi could see him trying to steady himself mentally, trying to become the composed fighter he had been at the beginning of the night. But the crowd had changed. The atmosphere had changed. And deep down, Ethan knew he had helped cause it himself. Earlier, he had wanted everyone laughing with him. Now he just wanted them to stop watching him fail. Naomi adjusted her breathing carefully against the pain under her ribs. Sweat clung lightly along her forehead now, catching the harsh white light above them. Ethan circled slower this time, eyes fixed carefully on her feet instead of her hands. Smarter. More disciplined. Coach Brooks noticed immediately and gave a faint nod to himself. Finally, Ethan was thinking again instead of reacting. The room remained painfully quiet except for the hum of the lights and the distant rattle of traffic outside the gym windows. Then Ethan suddenly stepped inside with a clean, controlled combination, abandoning ego for technique at last. Naomi reacted instantly, blocking the first motion and slipping under the second, but this time Ethan adjusted quickly instead of chasing recklessly. Naomi's eyes narrowed slightly. Better. The exchange tightened. Faster footwork. Cleaner movement. Less emotion. For the first time all night, Ethan looked like the fighter people respected before the cameras came out. But Naomi also noticed something else. He was finally respecting her too. The realization changed the energy between them. The arrogance faded little by little, replaced by focus. Real focus. Ethan stepped back one pace, breathing hard. "You could have humiliated me already," he admitted quietly. Naomi kept her guard relaxed. That was never the point. Ethan stared at her for a second longer than he meant to. Across the ring, Tyler slowly lowered himself onto the bench near the lockers, suddenly uncomfortable with every joke he made earlier. One of the girls beside him crossed her arms and whispered softly, "We were awful to her." Tyler did not answer, because there was nothing to defend anymore. Ethan stepped forward again, calmer now, and the next exchange happened so quickly the room barely breathed during it. Movement. Pivot. Reset. Naomi's ribs screamed beneath the tight wrap around her side, but she stayed composed through the pain. Ethan finally created a small opening and tapped her shoulder lightly before backing away respectfully instead of pressing recklessly forward. The room noticed immediately. So did Naomi. Ethan lowered his gloves slightly. "There," he said between breaths. "That is what sparring is supposed to feel like." Naomi looked at him steadily. For the first time all night, there was no mockery in his voice. No performance. Just honesty. Coach Brooks watched both of them quietly now, something almost proud settling into his weathered expression. Because the real fight inside the gym had stopped being about winning several minutes ago. It had become about who was willing to let go of their ego first. Ethan wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his glove, chest rising heavily. Then his eyes drifted downward for half a second toward Naomi's side. He noticed the subtle stiffness in her breathing again, the guarded way she rotated her torso. Understanding slowly entered his face. "How bad is the injury?" he asked quietly. Naomi hesitated just long enough to answer the question without words. Ethan stared at her, stunned all over again, because suddenly he realized something even harder to process than her skill. She had done all of this while hurt. The realization lingered visibly across Ethan's face as the two of them circled slowly beneath the harsh white lights. Naomi's breathing stayed measured, but now that he had noticed the injury, he could not unsee it. The subtle hesitation every few rotations. The careful way she protected one side during resets. The controlled breaths between exchanges. She had been carrying pain through the entire sparring session while everyone around the ring laughed at her before the first bell even sounded. The thought settled heavily into Ethan's chest. Around them, the gym remained silent except for the low hum of the ceiling fans and the occasional squeak of sneakers against canvas. Nobody wanted to interrupt whatever this had become. Coach Brooks rested both forearms on the ropes now, eyes thoughtful beneath his gray cap. Tyler sat motionless on the bench near the lockers, staring at the mat with visible discomfort twisting across his face. Earlier, he had wanted entertainment. Now he looked ashamed to even be holding his phone. Ethan lowered his gloves slightly, still watching Naomi carefully. "You should not even be sparring right now," he said quietly. Naomi adjusted her stance. "Probably not." "Then why are you?" Her eyes flicked downward for half a second before returning to his. "Because missing training costs money." The answer landed softly, but the room felt it anyway. One of the younger students near the mirrors slowly looked away, embarrassed by how easily they had mocked her earlier. Ethan swallowed hard. He had never once wondered why Naomi cleaned the floors after class instead of leaving with everyone else. Never wondered why her shoes looked worn out or why she stayed late wiping down heavy bags after midnight sessions. He had only seen what was convenient to judge. Naomi stayed calm across from him despite the pain spreading through her ribs now. The injury was becoming harder to ignore. Warm pressure pulsed beneath the wrap around her side every time she inhaled deeply. But she refused to show weakness openly. Not because she was proud, because life had taught her that visible struggle often invited disrespect instead of compassion. Ethan seemed to understand that now too. The arrogance had drained almost completely from his posture. Coach Brooks finally stepped closer to the ropes. 30 seconds, he called calmly. Neither fighter moved immediately afterward. The tension in the room no longer felt hostile. It felt reflective somehow, like everyone inside the gym was quietly replaying their own behavior from earlier in the night. Then Ethan slowly raised his gloves again. Not flashy, not mocking, respectful. Naomi noticed instantly. So did Coach Brooks. Ethan stepped forward carefully this time, controlled and technical. Naomi responded in kind despite the pain tightening beneath her ribs. Their movements became quieter now, cleaner, less emotional. No crowd-pleasing aggression, no ego. Just two skilled fighters reading each other honestly for the first time that night. Naomi slipped one approach smoothly and pivoted away, but pain flashed sharply through her side the moment she rotated too hard. Her breath caught before she could hide it fully. Ethan immediately stepped back instead of pressing forward. The room noticed that too. Tyler stared openly now, confused by the guilt settling in his stomach. Because Ethan had finally done something none of them had done earlier. He paid attention to her humanity before his own pride. Naomi straightened carefully, breathing shallow for a second. Ethan shook his head slightly. "You are tough," he admitted quietly. Naomi gave the smallest shrug. "No," she said. "Just used to it." Those words hit Ethan harder than anything else that night. Used to it. Used to being underestimated. Used to pushing through pain quietly. Used to people deciding who she was before speaking to her. The gym felt colder suddenly beneath the fluorescent lights. Coach Brooks lowered his eyes briefly, jaw tightening with understanding. Ethan stared at Naomi for a long second, guilt and admiration mixing visibly across his face now. Then the final seconds ticked away, and instinct pulled him forward one last time. Naomi reacted instantly despite the pain burning through her side. Movement. Timing. Calm. Ethan stepped in too quickly, trying to reclaim momentum before the bell. Naomi pivoted sharply, redirected his forward pressure with precise balance, and lightly tapped his chest protector cleanly before stepping away untouched. The bell rang at that exact moment. Sharp. Metallic. Final. Ethan froze where he stood, breathing hard beneath the buzzing lights while the entire gym stared at Naomi Carter in complete silence. The bell's echo lingered through the gym long after the sound itself disappeared. Nobody moved at first. Nobody clapped. The silence felt too heavy for that. Ethan stood near center ring breathing hard beneath the fluorescent lights, sweat sliding down the side of his face, while Naomi slowly lowered her gloves across from him. The final exchange kept replaying inside everyone's head. Not because it was flashy, because it was clean, calm, certain. Naomi's chest rose carefully beneath the loose black shirt as pain tightened sharply along her ribs now that the adrenaline was fading. She hit it well, but not well enough anymore. Ethan saw it clearly now. Coach Brooks saw it too. The old trainer climbed halfway through the ropes, eyes fixed on Naomi with an expression that had shifted completely from curiosity to concern. "That is enough," he said quietly. Naomi nodded once. Ethan did not move immediately. His glove stayed raised halfway before slowly dropping to his sides. The arrogance that walked into the ring earlier that evening was gone now. In its place sat something far more uncomfortable. Self-awareness. Around the ring, students shifted awkwardly beneath the cold gym lights. Tyler stared at the floor near his shoes, unable to meet Naomi's eyes anymore. One of the younger students finally whispered softly. She outclassed him. Nobody argued. Ethan swallowed hard as those words drifted across the silence. But strangely, they did not make him angry anymore. Just honest. Naomi stepped carefully toward the ropes, her movements slower now as the pain in her side became harder to hide. The moment she placed one hand against the top rope for balance, Coach Brooks immediately noticed. "Easy," he said quietly. Ethan's eyes narrowed with realization. "How long have you been injured?" Naomi hesitated. Just enough to answer the question. "About 2 weeks." The room reacted instantly with soft murmurs of disbelief. Tyler looked up sharply. "Wait," he said under his breath. "She did all this hurt." Naomi ignored the reactions around her. She bent slightly near the ropes, reaching for her hoodie where it lay folded beside the ring. But the motion pulled sharply against her ribs. Her face tightened for half a second before she controlled it again. Ethan saw that too. Without thinking, he stepped forward instinctively. "Here," he said quietly, picking up the hoodie before she could reach it fully. Naomi looked surprised for the first time all night. Ethan handed it to her carefully. No performance. No cameras. Just respect. The gym noticed the change immediately. Earlier he had spoken to her like she did not belong there. Now he could barely look at her without embarrassment creeping into his expression. Naomi slipped the hoodie carefully over her shoulders, breathing shallowly beneath the fabric. Coach Brooks folded his arms tightly, still studying her. "Where did you train?" he finally asked. Naomi looked down briefly. "My father taught me first," she said quietly. "Then Golden Street Boxing Club back in Akron." Coach Brooks blinked hard. Recognition flashed across his weathered face instantly. "Marcus Carter?" Naomi nodded once. The room stayed silent as Coach Brooks slowly exhaled through his nose. "Your father had the cleanest defensive footwork I ever saw," he murmured softly. Ethan looked between them, stunned again. "You knew her father?" Coach Brooks gave a faint nod without taking his eyes off Naomi. "Years ago." His voice softened slightly. He used to come to regional tournaments carrying this little girl half asleep on his shoulders. Naomi lowered her eyes for a moment. The memory hit harder than she expected. She could almost smell the old leather seats in her father's truck again. Hear old R&B songs humming softly through broken speakers during late drives home from training. Ethan stood completely still beside her now, guilt settling heavier across his chest with every passing second. Because suddenly Naomi was no longer just the quiet cleaning girl from the gym. She was someone with history, sacrifice, discipline, someone he had judged before bothering to learn a single thing about. Tyler rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly near the lockers. "We were jerks," he admitted quietly. Nobody disagreed. Naomi adjusted the sleeves of her hoodie slowly, still catching her breath beneath the buzzing fluorescent lights. The gym felt different now. Smaller somehow. More honest. Ethan stared at Naomi for another long second before finally speaking again, his voice lower than before. "I laughed at you before you even touched gloves," he admitted quietly. Naomi met his eyes calmly. Ethan swallowed hard. "And you still treated me with respect the entire time." The silence that followed hurt more than humiliation ever could. The silence after Ethan's confession stretched across the gym like something physical. Nobody shifted. Nobody reached for their phones anymore. Even the fluorescent lights overhead seemed quieter somehow, their cold buzzing fading beneath the weight of the moment settling around the ring. Naomi stood near the ropes with her hoodie pulled loosely over her shoulders, breathing carefully against the ache in her ribs while Ethan remained in front of her, eyes lowered for the first time all night. Earlier, he had wanted the room to see him dominate. Now he looked like he wished nobody had seen any of it. Coach Brooks stepped fully into the ring at last, old knees creaking softly against the canvas. His weathered eyes moved between both fighters carefully. "That matters more than winning," he said quietly. Ethan looked up slowly. Coach Brooks nodded toward Naomi. "Skill can be taught. Discipline can be trained. But respect?" He shook his head faintly. "That part shows up when people think nobody important deserves it." The words landed hard across the room. Tyler rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly near the lockers, unable to stop replaying the jokes from earlier in his head. The little laughs. The comments. The way everybody decided Naomi belonged on the floor with a mop instead of inside the ring, before she even touched gloves. One of the younger students near the mirrors finally spoke softly. "I thought she was just here to clean." Naomi looked toward him calmly. No anger. No bitterness. Somehow that made the shame around the room feel even worse. Ethan slowly removed one glove, then the other, tossing them gently onto the ring floor beside him. His hands looked strangely uncertain without them. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. Naomi adjusted the sleeve of her hoodie over her wrist. "You do." The honesty of the answer surprised a few people. But Ethan nodded immediately. "Because she was right. I judged you before I even knew your name," he admitted. "I thought because you cleaned the gym and stayed quiet that you were." He stopped himself, jaw tightening. Naomi finished the sentence for him anyway. "Less than you." Ethan looked down. "Yeah." The room went painfully still again. Coach Brooks crossed his arms quietly, saying nothing. This part mattered too. Not just the mistake. The willingness to admit it out loud. Naomi leaned lightly against the ropes now, exhaustion slowly replacing adrenaline beneath the harsh lights overhead. Her ribs hurt badly enough now that even standing still required effort, but she kept her expression calm. Ethan noticed that too. "Why did you not say something?" he asked quietly. "About your father." "About training." Naomi looked at him steadily for a long moment before answering. "Because people who already decided who you are usually do not care about explanations." Tyler lowered his head immediately after hearing that. The truth of it sat heavily in the room. Ethan swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the mat beneath his feet. Somewhere near the back wall, the old speed bag still swayed slightly from leftover movement, tapping softly in slow rhythm. Naomi carefully stepped toward the ring stairs, one hand brushing lightly against her side beneath the hoodie when nobody was supposed to notice. Ethan noticed anyway. Without thinking, he stepped beside her as she climbed down from the ring. "You should get that checked," he said quietly. Naomi gave a tired half-smile. "Health insurance says otherwise." Ethan blinked hard. Another truth he had never once considered. Coach Brooks climbed down behind them and looked directly at Naomi. "You still training anywhere?" Naomi shook her head once. "Not since my dad passed." Brooks studied her carefully for a second. That is a waste of talent. Naomi looked away briefly. Talent does not pay rent. The sentence hit Ethan harder than anything else she had said all night, because suddenly he understood the difference between the two of them in a way he never had before. Ethan trained because he loved competition. Naomi trained because life taught her survival young. The gym stayed quiet as people slowly absorbed that realization. Then Ethan bent down, picked up Naomi's old gym bag before she could reach for it herself, and handed it to her carefully. No audience now. No ego. Just quiet respect. Naomi accepted it after a brief hesitation. Their eyes met for a second beneath the cold fluorescent lights. Ethan looked embarrassed. Naomi looked tired. But somewhere beneath the exhaustion and shame and silence, something inside the room had shifted permanently. Nobody there would ever look at Naomi Carter the same way again. The gym slowly began to breathe again after several long minutes of silence. People shifted near the lockers. Gloves were picked up from the floor. Somebody quietly turned off the speaker near the front desk that had been humming low instrumental music no one noticed anymore. But the energy inside the room had changed too much to return to normal. Naomi adjusted the strap of her worn gym bag carefully over one shoulder while trying not to aggravate the pain along her ribs. Every movement felt heavier now that the adrenaline had faded completely. Ethan stayed beside her near the edge of the ring, uncertain what to do with his hands, his pride, or the guilt sitting visibly across his face. Coach Brooks watched both of them quietly from a few feet away. The old trainer had seen fighters lose before, seen people embarrassed before, but what happened tonight felt different. Nobody inside that gym would remember the technical exchanges most. They would remember the silence afterward, the realization, the shame. Tyler finally stood from the bench near the lockers and walked slowly toward Naomi. His footsteps sounded awkward against the rubber flooring. Earlier his voice had been the loudest in the room. Now he barely looked able to meet her eyes. "Hey," he said quietly. Naomi turned toward him calmly. Tyler rubbed the back of his neck, glancing briefly toward the floor before forcing himself to continue. "I was out of line earlier." His voice cracked slightly with embarrassment. "Actually, all of us were." Naomi studied him for a second without anger. That somehow made apologizing even harder. Tyler swallowed. "I just wanted to say I am sorry." Around them, several other students lowered their eyes quietly. Nobody laughed anymore. Nobody whispered. Naomi gave a small nod. "Thank you." Tyler blinked, almost surprised by how simple her answer was. No lecture. No humiliation. Just grace. Ethan watched the exchange silently, guilt tightening in his chest all over again. Because he realized something painful in that moment. Naomi had every reason to embarrass all of them after what they did. But she never once tried to. Coach Brooks slowly stepped forward, crossing his arms over his faded sweatshirt. "Naomi," he said carefully, "how long since you fought competitively?" Naomi adjusted her hoodie sleeve over her wrist. "Almost 3 years." Brooks shook his head faintly in disbelief. "That kind of timing does not disappear." Naomi looked away briefly. "A lot of things disappear when life gets expensive." The old trainer exhaled quietly through his nose. The fluorescent lights overhead reflected softly across the silver strands in his beard while he studied her. "You ever think about coming back?" Naomi gave a tired half-smile. "Thinking about it costs less than doing it." Ethan looked at her sharply after hearing that. The sentence stayed with him immediately because it sounded practiced, like something she had told herself many times already. He glanced down at her worn shoes again. The faded hand wraps. The old gym bag with a broken zipper she kept adjusting carefully so it would not split open. Suddenly, all the little details he ignored earlier felt impossible to miss now. Coach Brooks nodded slowly, thinking hard. "You know," he said quietly, "Marcus used to say the same thing whenever tournament fees got too high." Naomi looked up quickly at the mention of her father. Brooks smiled faintly. "Your father never complained much, but he worried constantly about money." Naomi's eyes softened for the first time all night. "Yeah," she whispered. "That sounds like him." A quiet warmth settled briefly into the room. Not pity. Recognition. Humanity. Ethan leaned lightly against the ring post, watching Naomi differently now than when the night began. Earlier he saw somebody beneath him. Now he saw somebody who had carried pressure he never even noticed. Coach Brooks reached into the pocket of his sweatshirt slowly. "The regional amateur qualifiers are next month," he said. Naomi frowned slightly. "I know." Brooks pulled out a folded registration form and handed it toward her. Entry fee is already covered. Naomi stared at the paper without moving. Coach, Brooks shrugged lightly. Call it an investment in somebody worth betting on. The room stayed silent watching her. Tyler looked almost hopeful suddenly. Ethan looked nervous in a completely different way now, like he wanted her to accept more than he wanted himself to feel forgiven. Naomi slowly reached out and took the form. Her fingers tightened carefully around the paper as emotion flickered briefly across her face before she controlled it again. Ethan noticed that too. The cold fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead while rain began tapping faintly against the gym windows outside. Naomi lowered her eyes to the registration form in her hands. And for the first time in years, the future did not feel completely closed. Rain tapped softly against the gym windows by the time most of the students finally started leaving. The parking lot outside glistened beneath the yellow streetlights, reflecting long streaks of water across the cracked asphalt. Inside, the fluorescent lights still buzzed faintly overhead while the smell of disinfectant and old leather lingered in the quiet air. Naomi stood near the front counter adjusting the strap of her worn gym bag carefully over one shoulder, the folded registration form tucked safely inside the front pocket now. Her ribs still hurt every time she breathed too deeply, but something inside her chest felt lighter than it had in years. Around the room, students moved differently around her now, not avoiding her, respecting her. One by one, people who barely acknowledged her before offered small nods on their way out the door. Quiet gestures, honest ones. Tyler paused near the entrance before leaving, glancing back awkwardly. See you tomorrow? He asked carefully. Naomi blinked once, slightly surprised by the question. Then she gave a small nod. Yeah. Tyler smiled faintly before stepping out into the ring. Coach Brooks stood near the ring wiping down the ropes slowly with a towel draped over one shoulder. He looked older tonight somehow, but calmer too. Your father would have been proud of you, he said quietly without looking up. Naomi lowered her eyes for a second. The words settled softly into the silence around them. He used to say losing respect hurts more than losing fights, she murmured. Brooks smiled faintly. Smart man. Near the lockers, Ethan sat alone on the bench, unlacing his gloves slowly. The room had emptied enough now that the earlier humiliation no longer hung in the air the same way. What remained instead was reflection. Ethan stared down at his hands for a long moment before, finally standing and walking toward Naomi near the front counter. He stopped a few feet away, uncertain suddenly. Naomi looked up calmly. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. I kept thinking about something you said, he admitted quietly. About people deciding who you are before hearing you. Naomi adjusted her hoodie sleeve slightly, but stayed silent. Ethan exhaled slowly. I think I have been doing that to people for a long time. The honesty in his voice felt different now. Not dramatic. Not performative. Just tired. Real. Naomi studied him for a second beneath the cold white lights. Most people do, she said quietly. Ethan nodded faintly, accepting the truth of it. Outside, rainwater rolled slowly down the windows while distant traffic hissed across wet streets. Coach Brooks quietly turned off half the overhead lights near the ring, leaving the gym softer now, shadows stretching long across the mats. Ethan glanced toward Naomi's gym bag, where the registration form sat folded inside. You are really going to compete again? Naomi looked down briefly before answering. I do not know. Ethan frowned slightly. Why not? Naomi gave a tired half-smile. Because hoping for things gets expensive too. Ethan stared at her for a second after that, the sentence sinking deep into his chest. Then without another word, he reached into his duffel bag beside the bench and pulled out a pair of nearly new training gloves. Black leather, barely worn. He held them out carefully toward her. Naomi blinked in surprise. Ethan, take them, he said quietly. Mine are sponsored. I have 3 more pairs at home anyway. Naomi hesitated. Pride and exhaustion battled quietly across her face. Ethan noticed immediately. It is not charity, he added quickly. It is respect. The room fell silent again after that. Coach Brooks glanced over from across the gym, but said nothing. Naomi slowly accepted the gloves, fingers brushing carefully across the clean leather. They felt expensive. Solid. New. Something she would never have bought for herself. Ethan gave the smallest shrug, embarrassed by his own sincerity now. You earned them. Naomi looked at the gloves for a long second before finally lifting her eyes back to his. "Thank you," she said softly. Ethan nodded once. No speeches. No dramatic redemption. Just understanding. Coach Brooks killed another row of lights near the ring, leaving only the front counter glowing warmly now against the rainy darkness outside. Naomi slipped the gloves carefully into her gym bag beside the registration form. Then she turned toward the door, pausing briefly before stepping out into the cool night air. Rain mist drifted softly beneath the streetlights as she walked across the parking lot alone, hoodie pulled over her head, gym bag resting against her shoulder. Behind the fogged front window of the gym, Ethan stood watching silently beside Coach Brooks. Neither of them spoke, because somewhere between the laughter, the silence, and the final bell, Naomi Carter had reminded an entire room what real strength actually looked like.